Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. First of all, want to get one thing squared away on the levees repair work. There have been some independent experts who criticize this levee work, saying that it is being done with substandard materials and designs. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
What say you about that? Is that true? If it's not true, explain otherwise.
We are briefed by the Corps of Engineers on a periodic basis, usually about once every 10 days and once every 2 weeks. I was in New Orleans last week with General Strzok and some of his associates at the levee breaches. I asked him that specific question. He was very adamant that the soil they are using is tested properly, and they believe that the designs and plans for rebuilding the levee system are adequate.
Well, let me ask you, where is the criticism coming from? I mean,
I think it's coming from various parts. Some professors, some people from
what?
Professors.
Professors?
Yeah, and some engineers. But when the question is asked of those people, specifics where the soil test was gathered, I don't think they've answered that question. I know the Corps has asked that question. I mean, look, the Corps and all of us want to get it right. It's very important that we get it right. So where the soil, the test that they were talking about, we need that source. The Corps has assured me that they're using the appropriate soil and standards and plans to reconstruct these levees to the safest that they can, that engineering has designed.
Okay. All right, I'll leave that there, and we just got to make sure they're being built solidly.
I agree with you, sir. Congressman, one of the questions, the first question I always ask when I'm briefed, are we on time? And I always have to ask this as a banker, are we within budget? I ask those two questions. And I talk a lot about the whole safety issues. I mentioned in my testimony one of the first things when I've been down there a week, that everything flows from safety: housing, jobs, infrastructure, community flows. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel like coming back. Business will not come. We had lots of discussion about that issue. The president was informed about that issue. He acted very quickly and asked for the $3 billion from Congress to restore, rebuild the breaches, and do some other enhancement work. I'm not an engineer, but I have 4 grandchildren that are precious to me. And I remember at one meeting listening to all the technical experts talk about eye walls, T-walls, armoring, pumping stations, wetlands, all the things that when we talk about hurricane protection. And I said, if my son called me today and said, we're moving to New Orleans, should I be concerned about my grandchildren's safety? And the answer of the 5 people that were there said no, 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 and no.
Okay.
And then they said there will be flooding, could be flooding, but it would be manageable type flooding. That's the reason the evacuation program is essential. Yeah, I think it's terribly important that the $1.4 billion of hurricane protection that's in this supplemental be approved, as well as the $4.2 billion that's asked for in this supplemental for the people in Louisiana to be approved. I think it's essential. I think it's very, very important for hurricane protection and for housing mitigation in Louisiana. In reference to your earlier point, Congressman, we all have the same interest. I assure you that the President is committed to safety, and I assure you that the Corps is doing everything possible to complete the work order by June 1. It's terribly important to the people there and to the American people and to this administration and our office that the Corps be done with that work prior to hurricane season. We're doing everything we can to make sure that work is done. There are a lot of people, a lot of energy directed toward that area. As I mentioned, I meet with them every so often, as often as we can. And I always ask that first question, are we on time? Are we on time? June the 1st is headed down. The Corps speaks as it relates to that H100, H900, at 90 days, whatever. They are very aware of of June 1st start.
Let me deal with this discussion about labor and jobs and job development. If this is one of your areas, your long-term goals is to, get workers trained and get them into jobs. How are you going to get people back who want to come back, who were basically given one-way tickets out? Many people who want to return, but they have no place to live, and the fact that not only do you not have the temporary housing, but then you have you don't have rental units available, or as I mentioned, there's this discrimination against many of the people in the New Orleans area. So who are you going to train? When I was in New Orleans this last time, I was in a hotel, and the hotel was full. It was full of FEMA workers. It was full of contractors. And the people who wanted jobs could not be there. They could not afford the cost of the hotels to stay there. They couldn't even get back. So what is this business about training workers? How are you going to do this? I mean, what's your plan?
The president assembled a group of individuals about 60 days ago to speak to that issue. It's very important to the president, and it's important to our office that we have skilled labor force that can meet the demands of rebuilding in the Gulf Coast area. The people that met with the president came from an array of various entities. The private sector, labor, some former elected officials, the NAACP, the Business Roundtable, community colleges, educators, and that group is being coordinated with our office. We have talked about specifically how we train those people. As you know, the community college is a great vehicle to train unskilled workforce. As I mentioned in my testimony, it's our goal to have 20,000 workers trained by the end of 2009. There is a pilot program that will commence.
Who are you training, Chairman? Are you training the people who want to come back home and work, or are they coming in from other places? Who are you training?
We're training the people that want to come back. We're training people that are there now that do not have skills. We're training the people that are on the ground, and then those people that have been dispersed for one reason or another, or other people that want to come into the area and have jobs. Well, first of all, the community colleges are committed. I've visited with them personally about their ability to train these people, and they have assured me that they can be part of this training workforce. And as it relates to the undocumented workers and paying them less than minimum wages, I mean, we have in place, obviously, components of the federal government that look over those particular issues, and they are engaged in that process. Also, I would point out to you that the levee construction, there's something like $700 million that's been spent to date. 85% of those workers are from local people that are receiving pay.
The time has expired, but please go ahead and wrap up your comments.
That's fine. I'm done. In Mississippi, it's well over a half, and in Louisiana, it's about half. Mississippi should be done with the public debris removal by sometime in the middle of June, and there will be 85% of the private debris will be removed then. Louisiana, it's more complex. It's much more complex, Congressman, in that you have certain areas because of court orders or because of this issue or that issue, it has not been done. Plus, the city was flooded for about 8 days, while in Mississippi there was total destruction of some things. So Louisiana It will be some time, but I would say the public debris removal will be done sometime in middle to late summer, and at least 60 to maybe 2/3 of the private. Well, as it relates to our specific area in long-term rebuilding, when we look at planning for long-term rebuilding, specifically housing and some other infrastructure rebuilding, one of the first things we always talk about is overhead, administrative cost. And the chairman had asked me that question, the very first question, about what did I believe that the top number should be as it relates to administrative overhead, and I said 5%. Clearly, we can do things better. But I would say, Congressman, that Katrina/Rita was a complex, very complex hurricane that we haven't seen before. And as I mentioned, we can do a lot of things a lot better. But in our office, when we're talking about long-term rebuilding plans and we're working with the states and the counties and the parishes, one of the things that we always focus on is administrative overhead. First of all, on the $150,000, that is a maximum. It's pre-Katrina value for a home that's been 100% destroyed up to $150,000. So some people will get 60, some people will get 50, some people will get $75,000. So that is the maximum. And I might add, there are some homes that far exceed the $150,000, but that is capped at the $150,000. The other issue of mobile homes and trailer homes and et cetera and so forth, I know because we interact with the folks at FEMA, we interact with other members of the government, and they do have a plan. They do have a plan that will speak to those things. But again, our office, we're more directed toward long-term recovery of the region.
If you had your way, what would this Congress do to make this problem go away?
I think it's terribly important that the monies asked for in the supplemental for levee protection, hurricane protection, is critical to the safety of the people in New Orleans. And I would say, Congressman, I feel very strong about the $4.2 billion for housing, also housing mitigation. I think that was a number, as I say, coming from the banking business, I would loan against, with all the other issues that the president has asked for as it relates to hurricane relief, to meet the needs of the good people along the Gulf Coast. It's critically important that Congress approve the supplemental.
I mentioned earlier my speech in Cambridge 2 weeks ago. If someone asked you that question, when can I go back home? What would you say?
I would say that an individual that wants to go back home, that's the reason the CDBG money is critical. It's very critical to the rebuilding of...
No, I mean, if they say, when can I go back home? I mean...
Yeah, well, housing's a critical answer to that question. I think it's very important. Some of them have homes, some of them were renters in housing. So housing is a very important thing. Number one, they want to feel safe. They want to feel safe that they can go home. And that's the reason that the Corps of Engineers and the President has committed to rebuilding the levee system where people in business and both the public and the private sector will feel safe to come home, and the person that's in Houston, Texas or in Atlanta, Texas can come home. The second issue is housing. They have to have a place to live. And that's the reason the CDBG money and in the supplemental of the $4.2 billion is critical to the housing issue. Housing is critical. So it's very important that be approved, the supplemental be approved where housing stock can be replenished so that person can come back home.
What is the plan for public housing?
Again, that is a plan that the local people have developed, and the plan for local housing, when you take into consideration the $6.2 billion that Louisiana has been allocated, and we're talking about Louisiana, I assume, yes. $6.2 billion that Louisiana has been allocated in the first CDBG money, and the $4.2 billion that's been asked for in the supplemental. In that plan, the Louisiana plan, there is $1.75 that is provided for rebuilding of affordable workforce rental housing that will speak to the low to moderate income tenant occupied properties.
Yeah, okay. Do you understand?
Yes, I do, and I'm sure the Secretary of HUD or some other people would be happy to answer that question. I'll pass that on. You know, I The sense of recovery and the sense of coming back in the spirit of the people makes me feel very optimistic. The practical matter and the reality of it, it always goes much slower than what I would hope and what they would hope. A lot of that depends upon perhaps some factors that are out of their control. But I know that there is adequate liquidity. There is a lot of money. Bank deposits are 20 to 25% larger than they were pre-Katrina, so liquidity is not an issue. I know that bankers are willing to work with SBA. They're willing to work with some other programs to make sure that capital is injected into the economy. I attended a bank conference last week that the FDIC was a sponsor of, and it brought together bankers in the area, bankers from outside the area. They had workshops how they could help each other. There were some innovative, very productive ideas about to enhance the banks that may have some problems, some issues, from participations to deposits to buying capital. Lots of very productive thoughts were brought forth at that workshop, and I was encouraged. I talk when I go to the area. One of the things I always gravitate to because of my background is to go talk to the bankers. How's the community doing? What do you see? What kind of economic activities are occurring? What can we do to help you? And while there are clearly some challenges and much work that needs to be done, I sense some optimism with those bankers.
Does that include optimism for the minority banks? There may be 3 or 4 minority-owned banks. Are you?
I touch base with those folks. Each bank has a unique set of challenges. There are some programs that they have availed themselves with. There is some larger institutions that are looking for ways to assist those particular banks. And it's my hope that 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, they'll be stronger and better in serving those communities. One of the things that the president also assembled a group of foundations about 60 days ago and charged them with the ideal that government cannot meet all the needs. There will be some fill in the gaps, faith-based issues, child care, senior citizens, communities, libraries, all the things that government by law cannot meet those needs. And we assembled something like 20 foundations. We have a person in our office that is in constant contact with those foundations. The state of Louisiana and the state of Mississippi has submitted applications to those foundations to meet those needs. Also, I'm familiar with the Bush-Clinton Katrina Fund, and at the insistence of this president, there's been something like $20 million allocated toward black churches in the stricken area. So it's an issue that this administration feels very strong about. We feel very strong about it in our office, and I'm convinced that those foundations and the generous spirit of the American people will meet some of those needs. And I will say, Congressman, one of the contacts I talk to various leaders and faith-based leaders in the area, and you're right, it's a center of hope. It's the center of the soul of those people, and we need to make sure that they are restored as well as other infrastructure. We have had constant contact with the local people about specific issues such as the number of houses that were damaged. So it depends upon where your house may be. This last $4.2 billion, there are some areas that for one reason or another, and they'll be dictated by the floodplain and dictated by the certification of the levee system, that it's unsafe. It's unsafe to build back. And so you will be reimbursed up to a max of $150,000 to your pre-Katrina value, less any insurance or any FEMA money that you may have had as it relates to your housing needs. Now, the other issue is that it may be okay for you to be rebuilt, but you'll have to rebuild under the existing building code and under more stringent building conditions. So part of the money will be allocated to assist you in that mitigation part that will cost you marginally more money to rebuild because of the new building code. The plans of Mississippi and Louisiana, again, that's the people's plan. In Louisiana, you can take the $150,000 and build where you may desire. There is a penalty in Louisiana if you choose to be built outside. There's a haircut of about, I think it's 30%, but I will pass on your thoughts. There's a disincentive, as you said, if in fact you were in a floodplain, you did not have flood insurance, or that if you're going to build outside. Yeah, I think that's always in the uppermost of my mind, is making sure that I'm a fiduciary and making sure that the taxpayers' dollars are spent as directed. As you know, there are many oversight bodies that look at not only the Corps, but what's being spent down there. Inspector generals are engaged. There is an audit function that the Corps, I believe they call it the AAA, an audit function that does nothing but look at the Corps expenditures and their work and their progress for the integrity of the dollars that are spent toward that. The port is open. It's 100% availability. There has been some slowdown in the port. Some people are looking at other alternative ports.
Slow down from what?
It's probably about 2/3 back up as it relates to revenue stream.
Okay.
50 to 2/3 revenue stream. There's another issue as it relates to Mr. Go. It's a deep channel issue there. It's a safety versus economy issue. Okay. We've looked at FEMA numbers, we've looked at HUD numbers, and part of that will be obviously the onus of the administrator dispersing the money.
It has done
I've had
very
lots of discussion
poor job.
with the state leadership about that particular issue, and that's the reason, the integrity of that administrator, and it needs to be very transparent, subject to lots of oversight, where everybody can watch what's happening. Congressman, let me see if you talk about 3 or 4 issues. Let me speak first of all to the mortgage issues and potential foreclosure. Our office has had a meeting in Mississippi, and we're scheduled to have one in Louisiana, where we have asked the largest lenders in the marketplace to come and visit. And while the private sector has to do what the private sector has to do, and they have certain constraints, their shareholders' demands, and et cetera and so forth, we have pointed out to those lenders that there is some CDBG money that will be coming, and we hope a very short period of time, that will be in the hands of these people that will enable them to satisfy some mortgage obligations that they may not be otherwise able to do. The second issue is an issue that I believe it's in the hands of the local people. The local people, I'm sure, would be interested in your thoughts. I know they would be interested in your thoughts. I'm interested in your thoughts about the private entity to administer the property. But that's a decision for the local people to make. I'm happy to listen to your thoughts in more detail, understand it as we go forward. But again, that's a decision of the local folks. The mitigation issue, that too is a decision that the local people will be planning. In our negotiations with specifically the LRA, the $4.2 billion that's asked for in the supplemental has mitigation needs, we think legitimate mitigation needs that will be met. What happens to that, quote, so-called green space is a decision for the local people to decide. The outline that you just described, I would add one thing too, with no recourse to the federal government. I think I would be happy to sit down and learn more about that in detail, again, working with the state to see if there was a satisfactory plan that we could support as it relates to that mitigation. Mr. Chairman, we part of our discussion with the folks from the LRA, Louisiana Recovery Authority, and from the people in Mississippi was about the administrative costs. Capped at 5%, part of that, the marketplace will determine some of that because they're going to outsource some of that administrative duties, but we think that it should not exceed 5%.
Let's talk about Carita rather than Katrina. Carita, a Category 5, hits Louisiana. We've rebuilt to Katrina standards. That's the concern that a lot of the residents and business persons have. They're not concerned as much as you might think about pre-Katrina standards, and I don't mean you in general. I'm sorry, I meant in general, not you personally. We're looking at spending $100 billion rebuilding to pre-Katrina standards, and on our watch, having a Category 5 hit. On my watch, I've got a duty to do everything that I can to make sure that we exceed pre-Katrina standards. My understanding is that pre-Katrina standards are Category 3. Category 3 is not enough. You have not commented on what the pre-Katrina standard is. You're saying rebuild to the pre-Katrina standard. Can you say yes or no that the pre-Katrina standard was Category 3? Yes or no?
As I've shared with this committee, that hurricane protection is very, very complex. And that's the reason there is, I believe, in excess of $200 million that is part of the allocation to study should we go to a level 5 protection. And that study is underway now, and hopefully it'll be completed in a relatively short period of time. But hurricane protection is very broad. It includes not only the height of the level, but it includes pumping stations, it includes canals, it includes wetlands, it includes armoring.
I understand.
All those issues.
Let me just share this with you, if I may, because I have to go to another topic. Studies have been done. Studies were done years ago that prognosticated exactly what occurred with reference to a Category 3, Category 4, Category 5. If we continue to study these problems, something dastardly will occur on our watch that we may never be able to live within ourselves, because there will be a greater disaster than we've suffered already if we get a direct hit with a Category 5. Now, let me move quickly to something that you may not have a lot of authority with, but I have to mention it because a serious problem is about to manifest itself. It is manifesting, in fact, as I speak, and that has to do with the voting rights of people from Louisiana. The process itself is going to cause many people who desire to vote not to have the opportunity to vote. The process. One part of the process that concerns me is candidates cannot connect with voters. FEMA has not released the list of candidates, of voters, where they are, addresses, to candidates. If I campaign in my district to have an effective campaign, I can connect with voters. I can send them literature. I can write them. Those candidates in Louisiana don't have that opportunity because FEMA won't release the list of addresses of people who are scattered across the length and breadth of the country. Second point, we have the technology to allow people to vote wherever they are. In Houston, Texas, we have tens of thousands of people. We should have a polling place in Houston, Texas. There is no reason why people who live in Houston, Texas cannot vote in their election in Louisiana at a polling place on election day in Houston, Texas. The technology exists. We are failing the people who want the right to vote. It's not going to be an efficacious effort on our part if we continue along these lines. How do you propose we make sure that everyone who wants to vote have the right to vote?
As it relates to the list, I'm sure that, and I'll be happy to convey your concerns to FEMA about releasing that list. There may be, I'm not sure what the reason is. There may be legal constraints on releasing that list for other privacy issues or other issues that I may not know about, but I'm happy to do that. As it relates to the election in Louisiana, the state, I believe, has jurisdiction on how they want to conduct their elections, and I'm happy to convey your concerns and your thoughts to the leadership in Louisiana.
The gentleman's time has expired. I would advise that we're going to try to have another round if you are
Thank you.
Mr. Green.
Thank you again. Mr. Powell, permit me to share this brief vignette with you. And this actually occurred. I have some personal knowledge of it. A parent provided the funds for a party for a child, and the child wanted to invite a certain person who was known to be disruptive at parties. And the parent said, no, that person cannot come to the party. And the child said, but it's my party. And the parent said, but I'm paying for it. Now, I mention this to you because we're paying for the recovery in Louisiana. $100 billion in the final analysis, perhaps even more. If we're paying for it and we recognize that people are about to have their right to vote circumvented, then we ought to do something about that. That's the role of the parent. That's the role of the federal government, to make sure every citizen's right to vote is protected. We are about to witness citizens who want to have the right to vote not have the opportunity to vote, who want the right to vote, to exercise their right to vote, not have the opportunity to vote. So now, in the key position that you're in, how can you help them with their right to vote? To merely explain that the local government has purview and control is really not enough, because we have a lot that we can do as the parents who are funding the party.
Congressman, I'm sure it's the wishes of every local state official in Louisiana, Louisiana, that everybody that's entitled to vote be allowed to vote. And I'm sure all of those issues were discussed. And I would also suggest that I'm sure the Justice Department is aware of all of those issues, and the court system is available. But the good people in Louisiana want every person that's eligible to vote be allowed to vote.
I was at a meeting with the mayor of Louisiana. He expressed concerns about this. He's one of the good people of whom we speak. And he has his concerns about whether people will have the opportunity to exercise their right to vote. The NAACP in Louisiana, they are among the good people of whom we speak. They are speaking of the possibility of litigation because they too are concerned about the right to vote. The right to vote is the most precious right, among the most, I suppose there's some others, precious rights that citizens have. If we see an injustice about to take place, we ought to do something to thwart that injustice. And I'm just making an appeal to you. When you talk to the Justice Department, when you talk to folk who can make a difference, talk to them about this, because my understanding is satellites were not used so that people in remote locations can vote where you have a large cluster, Houston, Texas, for example, because it was thought that the people of Louisiana could not afford it. They are on a very limited budget. It's my belief that if we're paying for the party, we can require or at least encourage that some of this money that we're using and sending be used to have open, free, and fair elections. Because when this is all over and you see that the body politic, the face of it has changed, you're going to have, for years to come, people who are going to express disenchantment in ways that will cause us to have to respond. This is not right, what's about to take place in Louisiana. It's just not right. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.